Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to Crosswires. It's James here, and we are talking about something very important this week. I hope you're all got your hard drives ready, you've got your backup plans in place, because we're going to be talking backup and cloud storage. Now, I'm joined by my fantastic co-host, who's had her fair share of backup stories and me yelling at her for not backing up properly at the moment. Jay, how are you feeling? Are you feeling shamed enough yet?
Yes, and I won't tell you that I lost a hard drive 10 years ago because I didn't back it up.
I will say, for the record, I did offer to give Jay my old time capsule with a 4 terabyte drive. The one, actually, you saw in the video a couple of months ago that we upgraded, and Jay's like, no, it's okay. And do you know why? Because she wanted to take more souvenirs back and didn't want the weight in the suitcase.
I've got all this candy that it's not for me, it's for my family, but I've got all this candy that I promise has not been eaten.
Do you mean chocolate, Jay?
Or chocolate, yes.
There you go. Get the nomenclature correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And the gentleman correcting Jay's atrocious use of the word candy to describe finest English chocolate is our guest this week. Sorry, I'm completely lost.
Just completely corpse. It's fine.
Oh, yeah. So we have Pat with us. And Pat, you are now let me get this right, the Chief Technology Evangelist.
Yeah, close. Chief Technical Evangelist.
Oh, so I do apologize.
But it doesn't really matter. Call me what you like, just don't call me late for dinner.
Surely you can't be serious.
Don't call me Shirley.
Oh, good, yes! Oh. I like you already.
So before we get into and fair warning, folks, Pat has told me that he can sit here and talk for hours about this stuff. So this might be a long episode, but it's such an important thing that, we might run over our hour, but you know what? We reserve that for really good episodes. So let's kick into game. But before we do that, Pat, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself? Maybe a little bit about your journey to Backblaze?
Of course, yeah. So as you can probably tell, I am from the eastern side of the Atlantic. I grew up in the lovely concrete city of Coventry, right in the middle of England. And I, studied computer science, went straight into a software development job. And that's what I did for about 10 years for the course of the 90s. I coded in C and C++, and then kind of jumped across to Java when that came out at the end of the 90s. And I always tell people I served a 4-year sentence in product management because it was a job that just wasn't for me. Nobody reports to you, and you have to persuade them all to do their job and follow up on the commitments they've made. And it's a lot of, I crossing and T dotting. And I was glad of the experience, but I returned to engineering. And by this time I was at Sun Microsystems, God rest its soul. And I was working on single sign-on technology, which of course everybody's familiar now, with logging in with your Google account to access resources somewhere else, and Okta. It seems like almost every workplace uses Okta for single sign-on. But this was like around 2004, 2005, and Sun was open sourcing its single sign-on technology in a project called OpenSSO. And the engineering director pointed at me, just like Jay did there, and said, Pat, you're good at talking to people. You be the community guy. Because there really wasn't a job title for what I was expected to do. So my job was to figure out this open source stuff, because we had a proprietary product and an engineering team that had been their mode of operation for the past few years. And then kind of bring that into the engineering team and act as a bridge between our community of users and partners and so on, and that, the product and engineering teams. And that was just incredible fun. I built this community from the ground up over, the next 4 or 5 years. In the last year I was there, which was like the last year of Sun's independent existence, we had a community day in New York City. And, one of the great things there was, we had business customers, paying us money like they always had for single sign-on solutions. We had partners who really appreciated being able to see inside the product and diagnose issues. And then we had open source users who were deploying, self-supporting, deploying the product, active in the community, asking questions. And there was a little bit of unspoken quid pro quo there, because they would often be great advocates for the technology and references. So we had one team based out of Duke University called Cancer and Leukemia Group B. And they brought together researchers from all over the US, obviously working on cancer and leukemia. And it was a classic federation use case. So each of these researchers had their login to their home university, but they needed to access this set of shared resources. And academic institutions are time rich and cash poor. Mm-hmm. They've got TAs and graduate students lying around that can be put to work. So yeah, they were a customer, and I told that story many times on stage. And anyway, back to New York, NYU was another open source user. So I organized this day-long event. It was an unconference. So, the plan was come with a session in mind if you want to speak, and we'll assemble the agenda, first order of business. And NYU gave us this marvelous room. It was on about the 6th floor in Greenwich Village with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked New York.
Wow.
And they gave it for us for their internal charging rate of something like $200 for the day. Anyway, so that was actually St. Patrick's Day, 2009. So I got to take out some of the folks on the company credit card on St. Patrick's Day in New York, which was quite enjoyable. But, unfortunately, soon after that, the Oracle acquisition of Sun was announced and the fund stopped. And I really didn't want to become an Oracle employee. They were quite open about their disdain for the open source side of Sun. And I ended up at Salesforce as a developer evangelist. So I actually had the official title then and learned so much. I was there like 2010 to 2016. I was in the team I was in, developer relations, set up the developer zone at Dreamforce. Dreamforce, I think by the time I left, it was 100,000 attendees. It had outgrown the big conference center in San Francisco, the Moscone Conference Center, and had like events in nearby hotels. And the developer zone was a floor of Moscone West. And it was like a conference within a conference. You could have 10 or 15,000 developers show up and not set foot into the wider, optimize your sales automation lead gathering process sessions. They were there for using the REST API.
Yeah.
So that was incredible fun. And I went on to a startup in data engineering called StreamSets, and they were acquired earlier this year by Software AG. I wasn't still there when that happened, but that was a very nice event for me. Spent a little time at Citrix and then landed at Backblaze at the beginning of this year. So I've been round this cycle of building technical communities, working with technical communities in several different technology domains. But it's always the same. It's always a case of educating developers. You can't market to developers and admins and technical professionals. What's the language guideline on this? Are we at like PG-13 or
PG-13? I mean, with a little bit of leeway.
Okay,
yeah.
So technical professionals have highly developed bullshit detectors. So, you cannot market to these people. So, what I do is I educate them. And, I bring value when I'm writing a blog post or presenting a conference session. Even if you're not interested in anything that like my employer is doing, you're going to learn useful things. And that's really it. And just building the community, connecting people so that they can share that experience with each other.
Absolutely. And, from personal experience working, across a range of roles, but also using a range of products, we've said it many times on this show that the community that Squadcast have built of podcasters is fantastic. And not, we have that, hey, there's something going on with the system. Well, obviously we're meant to file a support ticket, but we also have, the tech Slack channel in there where we can, talk a little bit. And, I've seen wonderful events put on by developer teams and by developer relations to really excite. I think it's a sign of a good product when they don't hide behind the code and they're willing, this is what we're doing. I mean, a great example for Backblaze, one of the things that's always impressed me about Backblaze is how transparent Backblaze are on their drive stats.
Yeah.
That's a huge sign of trust in their community and openness. I think your Q3s just came out, didn't they, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, Q3 Backblaze drive sets came out yesterday. It's probably still a top item on the blog, and I'm actually preparing a follow-up blog post on that, explaining how we're using some data lake techniques with Backblaze, our cloud object storage Backblaze B2, and explaining how you can play along at home. We're publishing, as well as publishing a zipped CSV of drive metrics, we're publishing it in a data format that makes it much more amenable to just running SQL queries against it. But I guess we can dive deeper into that later on. We were talking about cloud object storage. But yeah, we are almost radically transparent. When we were founded, I guess the origin myth, but it's actually true, is that one of our founders' friends, their laptop hard drive died. And she said, Brian, you've got to help me get my data back. What do I do? And he said, oh, yeah, I can help you with that. Where's your backup? And she was like, I don't need a lecture. I just need help. And, Brian Wilson, one of our co-founders, it became very apparent that, he was a techie. He had external USB drives and looked after himself, took one of them to work for an offsite backup. But most civilians are not that savvy, and they just need something that works. And so this seed was planted, I guess, in about 2007 or so, when the company, I think the company was founded, April 2007. So I guess at the end of 2006, early 2007, he started thinking about, how can I create a backup service for ordinary people? And there were options around at that time, but they were pretty expensive or pretty cumbersome. And he got together with a few of his longtime colleagues from that he'd been around the loop with at different companies, and they actually stood back and looked at it from the user point of view and said, okay, how's this going to work? Is it going to be based around plugging drives in? They zeroed in on cloud storage pretty early on, and this was like a year after Amazon had launched S3. So this was pretty early on in the days of the cloud. And then they said, okay, well, how are we going to package this? And they very quickly realized, they did a lot of kind of focus groups with friends and so on. Most, again, I'll use the term civilians, aren't really sure the difference between a megabyte and a gigabyte, and absolutely don't know. I mean, if they know the capacity of the hard drives, they've got no idea how much data is on it.
Yeah.
And so they conceived of this thing not as, I'm going to pay you for so many bytes each month, but I'm going to pay for a service that will give me peace of mind. And they talked to people and said, okay, how do we price this? And at one end of the curve, there were people who said, well, it's on the internet, it should be free. And then on the other end, there were people who say, my data is incredibly valuable. I'd pay $50 a month for that. But there was a huge kind of, it's like a bell curve. There was a huge peak in the middle. People said, yeah, $5 a month, I'd be all in.
Mm.
And that's really interesting because they started with the pricing. That was a key part. They started with the idea that, one, it has to be easy, and two, it has to be accessible for ordinary people in terms of the price. And they looked at S3, because that was the shiny new thing, and said, there is no way we can do this on S3. It's like way too expensive. And so they basically said, okay, what's the cheapest way we can put storage on the internet? And custom designed what they called a storage pod, which is essentially, I think originally it was 45 hard drives in a box with a motherboard and 2 power supply units. And then, so that was the base, and that would run Linux, very simple stuff. Linux, nothing fancy, no SCSI or NFS or anything. Tomcat, I think. And then basically wrote layers of software to build, you've got your basic unit is this storage pod, which, whatever it was, 4 times 45. So that's about 180 terabytes at the beginning. And you rack those up and you write software to build them together to store data in a redundant way. And so going back to I told you I could speak all day on this. Going back to your original question about openness, they shared the design for that hardware. And people did actually, I think they originally would kind of sell you the box as well, the bright gloss red enclosure. And basically they published the bill of materials to say, you want one of these? Go for it. Like, here's the shopping list. And people did build them. And, Backblaze, I think, sold a couple of them. They weren't in the business of selling these things, but they had people who were sufficiently motivated to pay them enough money to make it worthwhile to do a few one-offs. But basically, this was in the service of being able to back up people's data for $5 a month. And the other thing they said was, we'll make it unlimited. Because again, nobody wants a bill that's going up and down every month. Nobody knows, They said, we'll back up the data, not the OS and apps, because you get a replacement. Even the replacement hard drive often came with Windows, but unlimited data. And so it's easy. So $5 a month and then just forget about it. It's 7 now, 15 years of inflation. And we've always been, you can go back through the blog, pretty much every layer of software, the way that we combine 20 drives to get the data redundancy, and the way, we shard the data. We've published all of that because, like the big guys, the hyperscalers, Amazon, AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, they can just say, hey, we're really smart. This is a service. Don't worry about what's behind the curtain. And we've taken the approach of, well, we're kind of like scrappy upstarts. So we're going to share exactly how we've done this so that you have confidence that we actually know what we're doing. And DriveStats, that came out of that. 9 years ago, we were collecting metrics on our drive fleet every day. And we decided, well, we can publish this. It's not our secret source. It's helpful for the industry. And we started this thing called DriveStats. So, at DriveStats, every day we collect a record of data for every single hard drive. So now there's 230,000 hard drives with about 2.6 exabytes of raw storage across our data centers. So every day there's a record with the date, serial number, drive model number, all the smart attributes, the low level kind of indicators of like how many bad sectors and everything. And then crucially, whether the drive was failed and taken out of service on that day. And so DriveStats, basically every quarter we just zip up, there's a CSV file per day with, currently 230,000 lines in it. And we zip those together and put them on the web. And my colleague, Andy Klein, writes it up in a blog post and does a bit of analysis on, what we're seeing, what the annual failure rates are of different drives. And there's a lot of insight there. Like right now, he's written yesterday about how, our 4 terabyte drives are nearing the end of the life. And we're seeing like increased AFRs, annual failure rates there. And we've done a bit about, so we still use spinning drives for data, but we use SSDs, solid state drives for boot drives. We're starting to get enough data there to actually do some analysis of SSDs versus HDDs. And it turns out they are really reliable. They are more reliable than spinning Rust, but right now they cost per byte, isn't there for us to start using them for data.
It's yeah. I mean, SSDs. You see. I don't want to say crazy, but very outlandish projects from the likes of Linus Media Group, Linus Tech Tips. He's our entire SSD based, storage server. It's in a 45 drives enclosure.
Oh yeah, wonderful, like Rolls Royce.
Oh yeah,
wonderful if you can afford one.
Oh, absolutely, but it's not cost effective for that amount of data.
No.
And, spinning Rust, look, I've got a NAS here, as many of you, our listeners know, that is spinning Rust with, as Pat said, an SSD boot drive. And down the line, as I start to expand that, I'll put SSD caches into that.
I'll tell you that's exactly the direction we're going as well. You use those resources at the right places in the solution. And I've got a Synology 4-drive NAS, and one of the things Backblaze does is they have this perks program where you get so much money to spend on anything that's going to make your working life better.
Nice.
And so I bought a 4-drive Synology and could afford to put in the 2 sticks of SSD storage cache, and it's very nice. And I back it up to Backblaze B2.
There you go. I think you've hit the nail on the head here, how important backups are, because it's not a case of if you're going to lose data, it's when you're going to lose data. These spinning drives, they will eventually fail, as we know from your drives.
Even SSDs fails.
And the last thing that you want as a individual, it doesn't matter if you're a civilian or if you are a developer or if you are a CTO or, your data is valuable. And the reality is, unless it's properly backed up, you are really running the risk of losing that data forever.
Yes.
I've lost data in the past because I didn't back up properly. I will admit that. Now, I'm going to be honest, the whole... Is it the 3-2-1 backup strategy that people often talk about? The 3 different backups in 2 different locations. No, that's not right.
For one set of data, something like that. I never remember it either. You're right. A lot of people are very vulnerable to, and it's not just like mechanical or electrical failure. Accidents, theft. All of that stuff. With SSDs, probably more vulnerable to spilling a cup of coffee over your laptop keyboard.
Yep.
Than a hard drive, and you just leave it on the train. Leave your backpack in the pub at the end of the night. So and I've got a couple of anecdotes. One is like I completely messed up my RAID configuration with my music on years ago, and I still have. I'll be playing a track and there's like a second of another track where something went, I recovered most of the data very laboriously and some of the tracks were still corrupted. So I just put up with it. But when I joined Backblaze, so my kids have like backed up their Macs to Time Machine since time immemorial, but like they're getting older. Like my son is now at UC Santa Cruz. So he studied the first year of the pandemic at home and then went on campus. And so I joined Backblaze at exactly the time when it's like, he can't back up his Mac to Time Machine anymore. And so I've actually got turned on the groups feature so that I can manage my 2 kids' laptop backups. And it was my daughter, I put Backblaze on her laptop and literally 2 weeks later, it just would not even boot. And with Macs, they're lovely machines, but it can be difficult to kind of get in there and diagnose things. And it was at the age where it's like, okay, this is just dead now. And it didn't even get to the bong.
Ooh.
So, as luck would have it, I was planning to buy a new laptop anyway. And we did the order your data on the drive. So for restoring, so the Backblaze, the way Backblaze works is you download the application, install it, and by default, like I say, it backs up all your data. There's an exclusion list, so it'll exclude things like if we want to get super techie, virtual machine images, stuff like that often Often you don't want to be spending time uploading those, but you can like remove them from the exclusion list. But basically you run this thing and it just sits there, and often it takes a couple of days to gradually work its way through what data you have. And then from that point on, it just sits there quietly watching for changes. And every time you save a new version of a file or whatever, it sends it up the wire. So we end up with, a copy of, a synchronized, up-to-date copy of what you have, and you can password protect it so we can't read it or anything. And then if the worst comes to the worst and you need to restore, you either go to the website and, start downloading. And that, just the reality of how much data we have these days, can take a long time, especially if you don't have a super fast broadband connection. But the alternative that a lot of people take is that we will copy your data onto a drive and mail it to you. Or I guess ship it to you is probably more accurate. And you have 30 days then. So you pay, I think, a couple of $100 deposit effectively. If you return the drive within that time, we put that back on your card. But a lot of people just keep it because it's handy to have a USB drive. So I did exactly that, ordered a drive, said to my daughter, okay, you've got your new laptop, here's your data, get copying, get it done in the next 4 weeks, and I can send it back for the money back, because guess what? I don't get any perks being an employee. I don't get a free 8 terabyte external drive. Guess what? That 8 terabyte external drive is still sitting in my daughter's bedroom. So there you go. And we don't actually even make any money on those. It's like, it's part of the service. We have to charge the deposit, and we refund it when you send it back. So
makes sense. And some people are happy to just not to pay that deposit for an 8 terabyte drive. I can see that being quite handy.
Yeah, I mean, like maybe they're like, okay, I had 2 locations. I had like my laptop and my cloud backup in Backblaze. Maybe I want to keep that 8 terabyte drive and keep a local backup so that I can get it super fast and keep that offsite backup up in the cloud.
And one thing, just so that we are 100% clear, I don't think any of us are dismissing the value of on-site backups through tools like Time Machine.
No, absolutely not. No, it's like defense in depth, right? On-site backups, super fast to restore because you can be on like gigabit or even like 10 gig Ethernet or, across USB-C. But if you have a fire or a flood or another catastrophe, you really need that off-site backup.
Absolutely. Now, as you mentioned, Backblaze is £7 a month. Now, that's per device, isn't it, if I remember correctly?
It is, correct. Yeah, unlimited data per device. And we do have users who, and we're very open, right? Our break-even's about 1.4 terabytes. That's how open we are. Our break-even is 1.4 terabytes, I think, these days. And there's a power curve. And we've actually published the power curve. Like Brian Wilson, who's now one of our founders, who's now our CTO, is a stalwart on the Backblaze Reddit channel and has posted the power curve of the whales who have maybe tens, perhaps even hundreds of terabytes. And then you have like the break-even point, and then the vast majority of customers have less than a terabyte. And it all works out. And actually those whales act as canaries in the coal mine, because if everything's working fine for those folks, it's going to work fine for my mum.
Absolutely. Go on, Jay. I think you've got a question.
I'm not. Well, kind of a question. I'm one of those who, for a little while, because of video editing, I actually was one of the ones who had multiple terabytes up there.
Yep.
Now, a cool feature you added, and it helped me a lot, was I could actually offload some of the, because I had a bunch of external hard drives. I could offload those to B2. You added that, and that is phenomenal.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I could leave that somewhere, and I'm paying you for all that data, but I'm leaving it somewhere, and then I don't have to worry about it, because I did run into an issue years ago. This is like back in the early days of decoding, where my .b2 file or whatever got corrupted, and I did lose a hard drive, but it was because I had way too many files.
Right. You were the canary died that day.
Yeah, but I have to say, I have restored so many times using both the download and the drives, and it was so helpful. I mean, I literally had one day I got to work, my laptop was dead, and I was able to to get my hard drive replaced had my hard drive to me within like a couple of days, if that, and it was incredible. So it was nice having the offset backup.
And just to explain a little bit more about what Jay just said. So the way the backup works is, so if you delete a bunch of data, we hold on to it by default for 30 days. And then it kind of ages out and, it's not there anymore. We can't keep everything you've ever done forever. Well, we can, but you have to pay for it. We can't do that for $7/pounds a month for everyone. So there's a couple of bells and whistles there. One is called extended version history, and you can pay and say, okay, I want, I can't remember what it is now. I think it's you can pay more and say, okay, keep everything for a year, or I can't remember. It might be 6 months or a year. So here's where on the backup side is going to punch me in the ribs or something, because I can't remember the details of extended version history. But anyway, you can pay more money and we'll keep it longer. And then the other thing, but it still has to, basically it's a replica of your drive. But, as Jay was kind of implying there, sometimes you want to keep stuff, but you don't actually want to keep it around on your drive as well as in Backblaze. So what we let you do is move it off into our other storage product, which is called Backblaze B2 Cloud Object Storage, where that's designed as a more flexible data storage location where you can say, okay, I'm going to move all this old work over into B2, and you, rather than being a fixed price unlimited storage, it's basically $5 per terabyte per month,
which is really good pricing.
Yeah,
especially compared to things like S3. But then you have that flexibility to say, okay, this is like my work from 5 years ago. I want to keep it around. I don't need it on my laptop. But the really nice thing about when it goes into B2 is that it's still accessible in milliseconds, and getting super geeky here. Backblaze B2 has an Amazon S3 compatible API. And the net of that is that any tools, and just about every data tool works with Amazon S3, they will, by and large, work with B2. You just change the endpoint URL to point to us, put in an application key and your bucket name, and you can access that data. So there's tools there's many tools. I use one called CyberDuck, because you can put your B2 credentials in there, and then it gives you like a nice tree view of your files, and you can drag files in and out, and it just works. And it is, it's almost, I say almost because things get tricky at the boundaries. It's almost like just having an extension of your storage on your laptop, but there are reasons that you shouldn't think of it like that. The semantics of how I can go so deep on this, it's annoying. The semantics of local storage and cloud storage are very, very different. And if you try to imagine, I could just point Word at this, I can make this object store into a file system and point Word at it and save files, you're not going to have a great experience. You've got to really treat it as an archive in the sky where I can drag stuff in and work on it and then drag it back.
One of the things I was going to say, other tools, because we want to be somewhat impartial. I love CyberDuck, but
other tools exist for the same purpose.
Absolutely. I was going to say Forklift. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Forklift, I need to double check this. I think Forklift can actually can mount an either storage-based support as a drive-like thing in macOS. Now, I think all of us here are macOS users. Tools do exist for Windows. I do wish Windows had some better. But one of my gripes about Windows, not to get into this too much, Windows backup local backup is nowhere near as simple to set up and use as Time Machine. That's been my experience.
Well, that's the trade-off of the vertical integration that Apple have. Controlling every layer of the stack makes for a wonderful user experience, but it just kind of...
It's a lock-in.
It's a walled garden, but it's a really nice place to live.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk a little bit about... So, We've talked about backup. So, as you said, with traditional Backblaze backup, the idea is, you've got a 30-day window, but it is taking a snapshot of your drive at a point where that snapshot is taken. So, it's not... So if you delete a file, it's going to stay in the previous snapshots for 30 days, or if you pay for extended versioning for about 6 months to a year, we will put a link to the extended versioning stuff into the show notes so people can find it.
I will search for it with my favorite search engine as we talk and figure it out because, sorry, go on.
No, it's all good. So that's great. But when we look at things like, and I'm going to use examples like Dropbox, iCloud, OneDrive, where they are designed to be your file system, Apple and Microsoft both push you very heavily into putting your documents folder into their cloud storage.
Which I did.
Yeah, I've done that. Oh, absolutely.
It's a different tool for a different purpose, I would say. So, yeah, and this comes up all the time. People say, oh, I want to use B2 like Dropbox. It's like, it's kind of like you want to use a screwdriver like a chisel.
The thing about those services, what I was going to come to is people say, oh, I've got my data backed up to OneDrive or backed up to iCloud or backed up to Dropbox. No, you have your data synced to those services because the minute you delete a file there are
maybe a little bit of latency.
Yeah, a little bit of latency. And some services like Dropbox, I know, has like recovery options, but they themselves, all three of those services, well, we are not a backup service. But you delete that data's probably gone very quickly.
It's like RAID. RAID is not backup.
Absolutely not. RAID is redundancy, hence redundant. Even ZFS, But when you delete a file, you delete the redundant copies of that file. Or if a file gets corrupted, or if malware overwrites, encrypts files, that you are SOL with those kinds of systems because it's a different tool for a different job. Absolutely, and RAID and ZFS, however you're doing that. Redundancy is about the physical redundancy, not necessarily the data redundancy. Because as Pat said, if you delete stuff.
Oh, very quickly, extended version history. Okay, so 30 days is included in standard backup. So you get a year. We'll save it for a year for an additional $2, and I'm guessing £2 a month. So that's like 9 instead of 7. So that takes you to 9.
Okay.
So you can restore old versions or deleted files that are up to a year old. And then you can get forever for an additional 2 on top of that, plus half a cent per gigabyte per month for files older than a year.
That's not bad at all.
So you have to do some math there, but So we will keep it forever as long as you keep paying us, what's that, $5. Yeah, that's the same as B2 storage, $5 per terabytes per month.
So I'm guessing it probably is because obviously it's your system.
That's precisely what it does. Yeah. It ends up. Well, in honesty, there's no difference at a certain level between backup and B2, in that it's all in the same storage platform that we've built, and there can be backup files and B2 objects side by side on the same disk.
The difference is the speed of access.
Just the access mechanism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I would just say, folks, so if we talk about keeping stuff, deleted files for a year, that is $9/pounds, depending on how the pound's doing right now. Your data's worth at least that much, folks. Think about that just really quickly. I always like to compare things to the things that we treat ourselves to. Well, that's what? Depending on your preference.
$2 a month.
$2 a month. Or for
if you have the Mocha Waka Choca, Grande Venti.
Or if you pig out at Greg's, that's one Greg's a month. I could easily spend £9 at Greg's.
Well, and one of my things is Backblaze helped me because one of my drives failed and I was able to restore pictures of my niece.
There you go.
Through that backup. And those are images that I'm looking at now and I could not have kept those. And yeah, that's why always have a good backup strategy.
Do you remember that story about, it was a journalist at Wired, and he had a 3-character Twitter handle?
Yes.
What was it? Was it Nat or something like that? I can't remember the handle. But a hacker really wanted that handle, and basically went after it with all kinds of social engineering, and it wasn't, the purpose wasn't to delete all the data off his laptop, but a side effect of the process that this hacker took to take control of the Twitter handle was wiping the victim's hard drive.
Wow.
And he literally lost years of personal photos. That was his only copy of years of photos of his family. And, you know, you can't even measure the value of that in pounds or dollars.
No. And you would...
Not at all.
But I remember it clearly. It was a sad, sad story. And it's a really good story to read because it explains the path. Because I think this guy, the journalist, actually got in touch with the hacker and said, I want you to explain how you did this. And in return, you know, I'm not going to come after you legally. Because so it's a very enlightening post on like how he, you know, went to some service provider and did a password reset over the phone that he shouldn't have been able to do because he got enough personal info to basically what do they call it, steal his identity, masquerade as him. So yeah, it's scary, fascinating, the article.
It really is. So B2, as you've already hinted at, is cloud object storage. Now,
yeah.
Before we go into a little bit about B2 specifically, now I'm aware of a challenge I'm about to set you. In a few minutes, can you give our listeners a bit of the TLDR on what object storage is?
Absolutely. So, yeah, the reference point really for the industry is Amazon S3, which was released in 2006. And really before that point, you know, we used what are called, POSIX file system semantics. So don't worry about what any of that means. Like, it's the way that your laptop, desktop, computer, server works with files in local storage. So an app says, hey, I want to write a file, and it says to the operating system, create a file with this name and location, you know, a path in the directory tree. And the operating system says, fine, here's a handle. So you can refer to this file later. And then your app says, okay, I want to write some data. So here's that file handle and, I don't know, 100K of data, whatever. And this can go on. And one of the things that the app can do is what's called seek within that file. So it can kind of rewind or fast forward and say, I want to overwrite this bit at the beginning, and now I want to overwrite this bit at the end. So if you think about when you record video, when you start recording the video and the app starts like saving it onto the disk, nobody has any idea how long that video is going to be.
Yeah.
And so you record the video and you press stop. And one thing that typically happens is that the app has reserved some space at the beginning of the file for metadata like how long the video is, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And then what it does is it kind of like finishes writing the video data, rewinds, and then writes that bit of metadata at the beginning so that when you open it, you know, whatever tool you're using knows how much, you know, how many minutes are there or whatever. And then when the app's done, it closes the file. So it gives that handle to the operating system, says, okay, I'm all done. And so that's like dealing with local files, and it works great. You know, that's the way that we dealt with files for decades.
Can I just quickly ask, just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly? Yeah. So when we talk about handle, a good example of that is the path in. So say, for example, in Windows, c:\documents/movie.wmv, or in macOS, you know, or Linux, you know, home. That's what we're talking about when we mean a handle. No?
Similar, but not quite. So say I'm the app, and I want to open, you know, /hello.txt. Let's make it easy. What I'm going to do is, so the user, say I'm a text editor, the user's typed in or selected, you know, hello.txt. I say to the OS, hey, I want to read and write hello.txt. And the OS basically just makes an entry in a table and says, we're going to be working with hello.txt, and gives you back a number that's like the index of that entry. And so it's a very small piece of data, basically like a number that the OS gives to me as the app, and then I can provide it, and it can go back and forth and quickly because it's very small. And there's more. So, and here's the critical thing. It's got to be more than the file name, because the OS is maintaining state, namely where I am in the file. Because when I read or write data, there's an implied location, which is where I left off last time.
Got you.
Okay. So under that file handle is, the path to the file, but also the location in the file where me, the app, is writing. And there can be multiple apps. So say it's a bunch of apps reading. There can be multiple apps looking at that same file, each with its own file handle, each with its own current location in the file. Okay. Now, so imagine that you are, you've put your banner image from your website in Cloud Object Storage, and you've got hundreds of thousands of people visiting your website. Their browser is, downloading that image. What I've just described absolutely does not scale to the internet, because, having a global, file handle table is just not going to fly.
No.
And so this is the root of why Cloud Object Storage is different and why we talk about objects. So instead of saying, give me a handle and keep track of where I am in the file, please, you say, here's a file name and a bunch of data. And you've got to give the entire contents of that object. We call it an object instead of a file, essentially all at once. You can stream it into the system, but you're basically sending it along a series of HTTP connections. Logically, you're giving it a single chunk of data. We won't get into large files and so on right now, but and then once you're done, it's immutable. So you can delete it. You can send it another chunk of data and say, hey, this has got the same key as that last object I gave you, effectively overwriting it, but you can't append to it, and you can't overwrite the beginning or the middle. So So when I said earlier, don't try and treat Cloud Object Storage, there are tools that do this that kind of, in Windows land, it kind of might be your H drive or something that is, a bucket in Cloud Object Storage, and it appears very familiar. But when Word wants to, overwrite a bit of a file, what's actually happening under the covers is you have to get all the old file, overwrite that locally, and write all the data back. And it's a very, very poor experience, if you don't understand that and know what's happening. Having said that, I can derail any conversation. There are excellent tools that actually do provide the illusion of local storage, based on Cloud Object Storage, but they work very differently. They work at the block level, so they split your file up into little chunks. And so the way that works is you can overwrite, but a chunk at a time. So it kind of simulates that local storage, but I've worked with one called LucidLink, and it's a fabulous product. That if you get the top end service, you can literally edit 4K video that's sitting in the cloud.
Wow. And
so you can edit files that are bigger than your local storage, because you're basically just reading blocks into a local cache, and it does read ahead. So you can literally scrub through files in Premiere Pro that it's like magic, but you pay $80 per terabyte per month for the privilege.
Yeah.
It's wonderful, but it's like a Ferrari. It's great if you want to win a race on the track, but not so good for doing your weekly shopping.
Is it fair to say Backblaze B2 is very much at that price point for general file storage? I mean, the stuff that we can talk so much about use cases, but would you say that's for it's general cloud storage?
So $5 per terabyte per month. And the other thing you can't forget, right now we have, and most cloud providers have what's called egress fees or download fees, and it's a penny per gigabyte, which is still
very cheap.
One of the lowest in the industry. It's free for upload. Yeah, how you've got to think of it. It's not a product. It's not a consumer product in the way that Backblaze Backup is. It's a service with an API for applications to integrate with. So we do have there's a web console. You can log in, you can open a bucket up, and you can do a bit of dragging files in and seeing how much you've got stored. But that's a courtesy and nicety. It's really built for things like business backup tools. So there's many tools. One of the most common is called Veeam. And that'll back up your Windows Server or VMs or whatever. Basically, it can plug into a whole range of different cloud object storage options, and B2 is one of them. And then, so keeping archives and backups around, either, according to a cycle or indefinitely, we are getting into use cases, but only 3. So that's one of our biggest use cases. I'd say probably our biggest right now is archive and backup, because it's so obvious. And that's an area where, don't get me wrong, S3 and AWS are, they've really pushed the industry forward. Fantastic pieces of work. But if you've got some data you need to back up and you're not operating on it with all those other services that AWS provides, you're not really getting the value out of S3. It might as well be in Backblaze B2. And that's basically the calculus that our customers make. And it's also for media assets. So audio, video, images, again, big files there. And there's not really that much special that AWS does for you. And again, we partner with, we have some great partners in that space. I've personally worked with a media asset management tool called Iconic. So how that works is you can have a bundle of images and videos stored in your bucket. So just to explain, the bucket is you have your account with whatever storage provider, and this is common across the industry. And then you have a bucket, which is a point of control that's got a name, and you use it for a particular purpose, and you might give different apps permission to access that bucket, and then you can have other buckets. So if you were your server backups might be in one bucket, and your video files would typically be in another bucket. So it's a way of keeping things organized, and within those buckets, you can have as many objects / files as you like. So this media asset management is called, will scan all the images and videos in your bucket and give you a lovely browser-based interface with a little thumbnail for each one. And they even make a lower resolution copy called a proxy of each video file. So you can go and drag the mouse across and see, oh, that's that clip, that's what's in there. And you can tag them, and it even lets you, if you're in a team collaborating, you can say, okay, I'm the director. I can go in on the web, through this web interface on my laptop from the train, right? It's that kind of level of resolution. These proxies are good enough to kind of scan through and say, okay, I want you to use this clip, and this is the in point, start at 5 seconds. And then this is the out point. You've got to end at 62.5 seconds. I'm going to put some annotation there to say, okay, this is the third clip in the series. And then, your actual editors can then come along and use Premiere Pro and grab that full resolution video and see those same markers to say, okay, so it's a tool for collaboration. But anyway, the upshot is, all of these industry tools, these off-the-shelf tools, they work with the £800 gorilla, Amazon S3. And because Backblaze B2 has an S3 compatible API. You just configure them to talk to Backblaze instead of Amazon. And outside of that, the app works just the same. So it can be reading and writing data into, aside from when it sets that connection up, it doesn't know or care that it's talking to us instead of Amazon. That wire protocol is identical.
Which is really cool.
And then just rounding it off, so archive, backup, media, and entertainment. We have customers who build entire applications. So those first two cases, you're typically using off-the-shelf products and saying, hey, use this S3-like thing, but with this key and endpoint. We've got customers who have built applications around the storage. So they're actually using those APIs. And when we launched B2 back in 2016, Back had been around for 9 years. We'd built this cloud infrastructure, and we said we can do this kind of cloud object service for the business customer. And it had its own API. Back then, things weren't quite as settled in the market. And it had an API which was easy to use, but different. And that's the key thing. No matter whether it was easier or more difficult to use than Amazon's S3 API, it was different. So a few years after that, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, we put an S3 compatible API in front of B2. And this unlocked the ability for off-the-shelf tools to work, and then developers to use off-the-shelf SDKs and tools and code with those SDKs that Amazon puts out that are very high quality and easy to use. Again, just change the endpoint and they work with B2. And so the customer I like to talk about, unfortunately I can't name them yet, but they sell home security cameras. And there are many customers that do this, so I'm not giving you much of a clue. But the cameras are actually uploading video data directly to their Backblaze B2 bucket. It doesn't go through their data center or application whatsoever. And typically, in these systems, they'll retain your video for 30 days so you can review it, download it, whatever. All they've done is there's a setting you can put to say, okay, the retention period for this bucket is 30 days. So we're responsible for that life cycle of the data from receiving it directly from the camera to deleting it when it ages out. And then their portal for their end users sits on top of that and just allows their end users to review the video. I heard a noise last night. Let me go review the footage from 10 p.m. and I'll download that 5 minutes and share it on Nextdoor. But the entire application is built around the cloud object storage. And obviously we're not unique in allowing people to do this. S3 kind of blazed the trail, but we are unusual in our cost effectiveness, shall we say, in allowing you to do this.
Yeah,
which I think is a huge thing. So go on, Jay.
Okay, because my last job, I was in charge of, before I left, working on the backup solution for their servers, and we settled on somebody else. I forget why, but the costs were like way more than Backblaze B2, and I still was surprised that we didn't go with B2, and because I mean, your costs, especially for startups, and any company, but especially for startups, is incredible.
Well, I know we'll be kind of radically transparent here and say, it's not like B2 is a clone of S3. They've got very similar, semantics and so on. But, we've got a simpler permission model. S3 allows you to define permissions down to the object level. We set it at the bucket level, so all objects inherit the permissions on their buckets. And you have two choices. You have private and public read. But for 80% of applications, that's all they'll ever need. And in fact, giving developers more choices adds complexity and risk of accidentally exposing data. Having public objects in a private bucket and vice versa, it makes it hard to reason about who can see the data. So there's a few areas like that where we there are areas where apps can fail, and we work with partners and developers to figure out what's going wrong and say, just do it a slightly different way and it'll work. But in the interest of transparency, it's not the same, but it's roughly 1/5 of the cost.
Absolutely.
And I like the simplicity, because I remember some of the data leaks we've had, and I will just say that my company I worked for actually was a victim of that. The data company they were using was using S3, and that data company accidentally exposed all of the confidential data on an S3 cloud bucket.
Oh dear.
So it's incredibly good to have that data locked down.
Yeah, ease of use can be a security feature. And the other thing I often talk about, people say, why, how come it's so much cheaper? There must be a catch. There must be a trick.
Good question.
And partly we designed it. The design center was cost effectiveness, and there is some simplicity there where Amazon is much more flexible and complex. But when you open up the AWS console and you see those 100 services there, do you think they're all self-sufficient, economically? Or do you think S3, the foundational service holding all the data, might just be subsidizing some of those science experiments? And so storage is all we do, backup and the object storage. We have no value-added services we're trying to sell you or anything. It's like
you're not selling a database cloud service. You're not selling a PaaS, not PaaS. You're not selling some sort of Active Directory replacement in the cloud or DNS.
CDN, no. And we have great partners that will. We have Cloudflare and Fastly and Bunny.net on the CDN side, and Vultr and Equinix Metal on the compute side that we partner with. So you can build a comprehensive, you can build a cloud application, soup to nuts. And we are, those partners, we provide free egress. So that penny a gigabyte I was talking about, if you are serving data through Cloudflare or you're, reading it into an app on Vultr, you pay $0. Because in many cases, we've actually got peering. So getting down into the weeds, we've basically got a network cable within our data center between our equipment and theirs. So it's not flowing over the public internet. So we're not having to pay carriers to ship the bits around.
It's going into between two literal or physical switches.
Precisely. So it's not that we don't want you, running, SQL query engines and data lakes and everything. We are delighted, and people do. And one of my jobs is to explain to people exactly how you do that. It's just we're not, that's not our thing. We are purely the storage, and everything we do, and everything we kind of have planned is in that storage. It's that is what we do.
Absolutely. And you know what? You've just touched on something really important. Jay, I think you were going to talk...
And we haven't even spoken about Nautilus yet. This is going to be a bumper episode. You may have to split it into 2 parts.
Well, we may have to split this across a couple of zip files. That's it.
Right. Oh, please. 500 megabytes max. Or is it gigabytes? I can't even remember.
Hey, at least you're not backing up across multiple floppy disks.
Oh, I do that too.
Sorry. I derailed you yet again, James.
It's all good. Jay, I think you were going to make a point about, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, a point you were going to raise is about the cost of services like Creative Cloud Storage, because that's designed as high performance storage for high performance is maybe wrong. It's very use case specific storage for your photos, for your Adobe Premiere video, that is very well integrated. Maybe, unfortunately, too much so these days, since Adobe seem to be disabling local save a lot.
Yeah, and basically, like the UI interface, I experienced this with even Microsoft. They would always encourage people to save to OneDrive, and I had to explain in my last job, click this little button over here that always closes every time you close it. Then you can save locally because they would always be like, "Where's my file? Oh, it's saved to OneDrive," and it's like,
which is magic. When you're on a plane and you want to just like tweak around with something, and it's like, oh, God damn it,
just save locally. I mean, look, if you are fully internet connected, then saving to OneDrive through Office is great in so many cases. And we talk about civilians. I know that for a lot of civilian users, and I do like that term because we are nerdy, we're in the ranks of the tech. For a lot of people, it's so simple. I tutor a 77-year-old retired solicitor in IT. I don't want to be stressing out about his backups. We are, of course, going to be looking at proper backups with Backblaze, of course. Other backup providers are available, but not on this episode. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about, and one of the things, you talked about Nautilus. Well, let's talk quickly about, let's just be really honest. All of this data storage, all these hard drives, they consume power, they consume electricity. And we are, whether or not people listening believe this or not, our opinion, at least this is mine and Jay's, we are in the middle of a climate crisis.
Yeah.
Yes. Dude, I live in California. I mean, wildfires, because the vegetation gets so dry, the wildfire season is getting longer every year.
And that's, I'm sorry, that is, that's putting people's lives at risk. It's destroying people's homes. It's everything. So, and unfortunately, the reality is data centers are a big, contribution to our electric bill. Yeah, big consumer of that. And so a question I'm going to be blunt about is, what are Backblaze doing to help, not reverse, but help mitigate that?
Yeah. And over the past, 16 years that the cloud has effectively existed, and of course the cloud is basically someone else's computer. There's been a lot of studies around comparing, putting all these eggs in one basket with having them all distributed around and so on. So, I'm not going to kind of retread much of that, but, we currently have, I think it's 5 data centers right now, split between, the western side of the US and Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And we recently opened, our most recent one was in a city called Stockton in California, which is about 60 miles east of San Francisco. And it's on the San Joaquin River. And when we talk about our data centers, it's kind of useful to understand that we don't build and own the buildings. We own the computing hardware, and we set it up in, our data center providers' premises. So they provide the roof and the power outlets and the AC, air conditioning, cooling, security, physical security, all of that. But it's our hardware. So we talk about our data center, and what we mean is the hardware and software that we have sitting in somebody else's building. And that's typical for pretty much everybody apart from the hyperscalers, those giants that do actually break Earth themselves. Now, we needed a facility that would hold, up to another exabyte in storage. So, I said earlier, we've got about 2.6 exabytes in raw storage right now. An exabyte is 1,000 petabytes or 1,000,000 terabytes. And so we looked around, and this provider called Nautilus caught our eye. And their facility in Stockton is a barge in the river. And when I say a barge, it's basically a big cuboid that is moored to, I think, 4 or more poles. So it can, if you imagine, it can float up and down with the level of the river, but it's fixed. It can float in the Z-axis, but it's fixed in the X and Y axes because it can float up and down, kind of tethered to these poles. And these are the kind of heavy duty poles that, that are going to keep it there no matter what.
This isn't your canal barge. This isn't a barge on the Leeds Liverpool Canal. This is,
No, this isn't on the Coventry Cut.
There you go.
So, so you got this cuboid that's floating in the water. And the main thing that's really very cool about this is that it is cooled by the river water. Basically, they have like an intake, at the facility. So they take in river water, it's ambient temperature, and then they have a heat exchanger. So they don't want they filter the river water on its way in. They don't want that flowing around the actual data center. So they have a closed system with water that does flow around the data center, and there's a heat exchanger there. And then the river water exits downstream in a location that is safe for wildlife. After it spends about 15 seconds in the data center system, and it exits about 4 degrees Fahrenheit, so 2 Celsius, give or take, warmer than when it was brought in. So it's discharged in a friendly location, and within seconds, it's basically the same temperature as the rest of the river. I mean, the amount of water is insignificant compared to the river flow. And so this is not consuming power. The servers and networking requires power to stay on, but they're not consuming power to cool it. And that's the important thing. So this is, this whole system been inspected and approved by multiple agencies. One of the reasons Nautilus did this first in California was that if you can get it approved in California, you can get it, it'll work anywhere in the US. California has very stringent environmental protections, at the state level, much more so than, the federal government. And then the other thing that is very, very cool in its own right. And then coming up along is it's actually located in the port of Stockton, which is like a tier 1 port, and it's actually guarded by the Department of Homeland Security because it is part of critical infrastructure. So it kind of piggybacks off that physical security. So you can't, you have a hard time walking up the door of any data center, but you actually have, the US government preventing you from getting to the door of Nautilus.
What's interesting about this is I'm thinking about like the future use cases, because there are like so many places where they could create new lakes. I mean, just like so many, or new rivers. I mean, or use existing rivers. It's like my mind is just going through the wild with ideas of where they could expand this project and add in environmentally sound cooling and really get rid of a lot of the environmental impact of a lot of our data centers. I mean, this excites me so much.
Yeah, and I neglected when I did my potted bio earlier on. I spent a year in the wilderness at Huawei between Sun and Salesforce, working with their cloud team. And one of the things that they were doing was building data centers in the north of China, where the ambient temperature was much cooler. You don't always have that luxury, California, you have to go up in the mountains to get cold. But even like down in Stockton, it gets over 100 Fahrenheit. So, well into the 30s Celsius, uncomfortably warm, shall we say, in the summer. I mean, all you need is that temperature differential. That river water is cool enough that it can do the whole job. And we're talking, several megawatt data center here. It's not just a little.
This isn't just a little hutch. This is a proper, fully functional, fully connected data center that's holding, obviously not just your infrastructure.
No, much more than us. Yeah. And there's a blog post. Again, we are, almost radically transparent. There's a really interesting blog post that my colleague, the Drive Stats King, Andy Klein, wrote on this, so that we can put in the show notes. But you just Google Backblaze Nautilus, and it's all there.
It is incredible. It really is. And, it's a sort of thing that I think it's good to see, because the reality is, as we use more and more data, we are going to need more data centers to hold that infrastructure. As you said, Backblaze needs to expand because more people are hopefully going to use your services. Now,
nobody deletes anything. I mean, that's the reality nowadays.
Hello.
And every so often you kind of have to offload it to somewhere, whether it's an external drive or a cloud service. But like the idea of actually hitting delete it feels weird.
Yeah.
I'm actually moving a lot of my data off of some of the services. I'm kind of consolidating my services I use. And right now I'm like saying, James, I've got like 5 terabytes of data. What do I do with it?
Yeah, it's you've got a lot of data, and that's not uncommon, particularly if you are a photographer. Now, one thing I want to say a little bit about going back to B2 is, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the first 10 gigabytes of data,
8 times as much.
8 times as much. There you go. Is effectively,
it's free forever. And the really nice thing especially for folks like developers who want to kick the tires, try out an app with it, you can create an account with just an email address. So we don't even need a credit card to get at that first 10 gig. And, we're not like other services where we'll take your credit card, and if you happen to stray beyond that free allowance, we'll start charging it. We just cap it at 10 gig. And until you do decide, hey, yeah, I want to go further with this, I'll, input my credit card details, and we're off to the races. And I think we ask for a bit more. I think we ask for a phone number or maybe an email confirmation if you actually want to put data publicly on the internet. And that's like
yes, that's right.
Yeah, that's just to raise the bar a little bit for people that want to, try and serve malware or...
Right, it puts that barrier to entry, and it's good. So
yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about that tank, because the use case, I'll tell you, we want to be transparent in what we do here at Crosswires.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges we face is that sometimes, like we will do for yourself, we want to send a preview of an edit.
Yep.
So that just for transparency, we offer this to every guest. Very few guests actually take us up on it, but when we're dealing with bigger profile companies, they may do. And one of the challenges is iCloud Drive sharing sucks. Mm-hmm. Because me and Jay have everything shared between us so that we can both work on show notes, both work on edits. If Jay's editing for me, maybe I'm, doing something and I needed to edit an episode, she can get to all the raw files. But if you've got a shared folder and you want to share something out within that folder on iCloud, you cannot do it. You cannot generate a second link. So, yeah, it kind of sucks. So what we've done is used a tool that comes with Setup called Dropshare. Mm-hmm. We've connected that to our B2 account. Mm-hmm. And what we do is we just upload stuff there. We get then a link generated through B2. We send that out, and it works well. What we've also got is for our new website, which is, but maybe by the time this comes out, the new website will be live. We obviously want to make sure we've got WordPress backups and whole site content backups. Well, the way we do that is so cool. We use a plugin called BackWP Up, which has an S3 connector. And as Pat mentioned earlier, Backblaze B2 is S3 compatible. So we just, as he said, change the endpoint, get it all working.
Yep.
We back up there. And then my TrueNAS instance, which is sat up there at the moment on a shelf every day, that has native B2. So it's not going through the S3 layer as such. It's, here we go. We support B2 natively. Put in your creds. And it then pulls it down into a storage pool, which is kept, further. But beyond that, I do things like, we might, we back up a lot of other stuff into that 10. We effectively use our 10 gig free as transitory storage to move into on-site backup. And then down the road, as we have more income from the podcast, we will do more backups. Eventually, we will back up all of our archives.
You're going to cross that 10 gig barrier at some point in the future.
We will. The nice thing is we have it set so that it's, at the moment, we have it set so that there's only so much data retention through those tools. But yeah, we will cross that barrier.
Understood.
And at a price point, it makes it very cost effective.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, one thing I'd say, Squadcast, if anyone at Squadcast is listening right now, I would love to see a way to, without using Zapier, because you had Dropbox integration. How about one for B2, folks? Let's have a way to send recordings straight from Squadcast into B2, please.
And that's the great thing is that you can implement it for S3, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and Backblaze comes along for free as well as, the reality is that the S3 APIs become the de facto standard for cloud object storage. IBM Cloud supports it. I think Google does, but Azure doesn't.
DigitalOcean do.
Exactly. So for vendors like Squadcast, it's almost a no-brainer. You get and this model that we see, bring your own. There's two ways it could work, right? Because you can basically, as a independent company like Squadcast, they can say, bring your own credentials for your storage, and we'll just, put it there. But we have other customers who essentially white label the storage. They resell it. So, our customer will pay us, and we've got they might do pay as you go. We have another. So pay as you go is wonderful for. With B2, you're really out of the realm of civilians into what we call prosumers, right? Professionals who are consumers, photographers, videographers, that kind of thing. But pay as you go is great because it's what you're paying is in lockstep with what you're using. Some customers, and particularly those who are reselling storage as part of their offering, want that variable monthly cost gives their accountants a heart attack.
Yeah.
And they would rather say, rather than what we call consumption-based pricing, they like capacity-based pricing.
They want to say how much, yeah.
Exactly. So we can say, okay, this is the deal for 20 terabytes of capacity, and you pay us monthly or yearly. That's what you have. And, there we'll say, there's bundling there that will say, one thing is we will move your existing data from wherever it is. So whether it's in another cloud, on tape, on a bunch of USB drives in a closet, we'll migrate that into B2 free of charge. We only ask that you keep it with us for a year, which you're going to do because it's a great deal. And you also get egress up to the amount of data you're storing every month. So you can download your entire data set or your entire, not the amount of storage, the amount you're paying for every month. So if you've got Joe's amazing photo site and you want to make it a shrink wrapped experience for your customers, so they just pay Joe, or maybe you have advertising so they don't pay anything. You can resell Backblaze B2 and have a very predictable costs. But anyway, yeah. So yeah. There's as I very accurately stated. I can, just give me an opportunity. I will talk your ears off. I can talk for England. No, actually, I'd have to talk for Scotland because my parents are Scottish.
Oh, there you go. But it is a fascinating world. Now, looping back a little bit, so because we obviously talked a lot about BT, but I just want to top off the Backblaze backup discussion quickly to say, obviously about £7 a month. It's great value. Now, one question just to make sure we're covering all the bases. Mac, Windows, no Linux support yet, if I remember correctly?
No Linux support yet, and probably never.
Right. Because again, it's a consumer product.
Exactly. It wasn't really designed for you and me. It was designed for my mum, who's coming up on 84, but very, technologically adept, on the laptop all the time, but just wants something that she can set and forget. Linux, I used to run Linux on a laptop. I was at Sun Microsystems when Microsoft was Satan in their eyes, and you had to have a very good reason to have Windows on your laptop. I was running SUSE Linux. So the thing with Linux is just a variation between distributions, kernel versions. Every time I upgraded, something would stop working, whether it was the sound or video would go to pot. It's hard to sell a consumer product that with ease of use as its design center into the Linux market. And again, we're very transparent about this. Economically, those folk, Linux users do tend to have a lot more data. But the tooling is there with, things like rclone makes it trivially easy to sync, a file tree into B2 and set encryption and all those bells and whistles for that power user. And let's face it, if you've got 1.4 terabytes or less, it's actually cheaper than the backup product.
Oh, yes, you're right. Good point. Now, of course, if you are a Linux user and you are a power user, you're going to use, as Pat said, you're going to have those tool sets. I love the fact that so many of the NAS manufacturers and platforms have native BT. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think Synology, even though Synology offer their own object storage.
Yep.
Through, I think they call it C2, just to be, I know why they call it.
Cloudflare has R2.
That's right. Who's got D2?
Sorry. Give it time. Give it time.
Yeah.
I do know that Amazon has a competitor product called C3PO.
Okay,
that was a very bad one.
That's the mail product.
How's George Lucas with that?
Yeah. Well,
I wonder what's going on there.
Well, it's none of his business anymore, really. It's now,
that's true. It's Disney, even worse. Yeah, don't mess with the mouse.
You'll get them out. You'll get the Disney lawyers.
I once had a Disney lawyer come after me on the web years ago. That's a story for another time.
I do love the fact that, just as a complete aside, that old episodes of The Simpsons have lots of jokes about Disney lawyers, and they are now Disney owned.
Yeah.
Anyway, Pat, it really has been fascinating. Thank you so much for your insights. And people, head over to backblaze.com because all their products are just nicely laid out there.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest encouragement, if you are not backing up off-site right now and you want to make sure your data is safe, yes, Jay, I am looking at you. If you can justify it, I know we're in a cost of living crisis, but if you can justify it, and I think, honestly, £7 or dollars a month is worth it, especially if you've got those family memories. And Pat, one thing to say for Apple users, you play nice with iCloud Photo Library because it is just at its core a file store. It is just a file. It can just be backed up. It isn't excluded. It's just a bunch of files that are backed up, right?
Yep. And those, yeah, exactly. And those, at its root, it is very, very simple. It's just watching the file system for changes and uploading like new files. And there's things to make it efficient, like deduplication. No.
Deduplication, yeah.
And like I said, there are a bunch of file types, like, sparse bundle. If you're a complete Mac head, you'll know what that is. They're excluded by default because they don't tend to be the kind of files that folks want to back up, but you can just go in there and delete the entire exclusion list and back up everything. The only things we stay away from are apps and the OS because it's seriously just a waste of time having 100,000 copies of Mac OS Ventura sitting in our data center.
And the reality is that's what Time Machine's for. That's what your local backups. That's what your carbon copy cloner backups of your systems are for.
Right. And if you get a new laptop, your laptop gets stolen, tragedy or whatever, you've got an OS. Yeah. I mean, your machine's like unusable without it.
And I think the thing is these days with, again, if we look at the Mac and look at, do you know what? I think the biggest thing now is because with very few exceptions, software is all online. You don't have that massive pain of a reinstall. It's nowhere near as painful as it used to be having to put your...
I can't remember the last time I plugged into the disk spinner into my laptop for a software installation. I think my son's got it at college.
I remember installing Into the Matrix on it was on like four or five CDs.
Oh yes,
and that installer had a glitch. If you did not time it correctly on the third disk to go to the fourth disk, the installer would stop.
Oh no!
I mean, it's like the old stories of installing Windows 95 via floppies, and that one floppy at the end.
Yeah.
Is bad. The only reason I've got an optical drive connected to my machine at the moment is, and this is going to sound very vintage, for DVD ripping because we got the complete Malcolm and Riddle.
DVDs, Grandad?
Yeah, that's right. DVDs. DVDs. Don't talk to me about those Blu-rays.
Aye. Had to walk uphill both ways to the rental shop.
Aye. When my late granddad came into the optical video, like the digital video thing very late in his life. And we got him he originally had a DVD player and he managed to break that. Don't know how we did it. I think he might have tried to use it as a coffee cup holder. Joke. But we then got him a Blu-ray player, but he couldn't understand the terminology, so he called them BDVs.
BDVs. Okay.
Love it. So anyway, Pat, thank you so much for your time. If people want to find you, obviously a bit more about Backblaze and maybe for some strange reason follow you on social media, where can they do so?
Okay, so Backblaze is at backblaze.com and Backblaze on the Twitters and Facebook and LinkedIn, and I think we have a subreddit, and then I am universally Metadaddy. That's METADADDY. I needed an AIM handle back in about 2002, and I was this was during my 4-year sentence in product management. I was managing a product called Meta Directory. The least said about that, the better. And we just had our first child, so Metadaddy instead of Meta Directory. And it's like metadata as well, Metadaddy.
Has Mark Zuckerberg come after you for that yet?
I had it first. Dude, I had this like 20 years ago. So yeah, almost universally, if you Google Metadaddy, it's me, but certainly on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and I am a social creature. You can ask me questions, so on Stack Overflow. But beware that if you do go down the Google rabbit hole of metadaddies, there are other people out there with, shall we say, interesting hobbies. I'll leave it at that.
Right.
That are not me.
No, okay. Right.
Now, Pat, I'm wondering what some of your AIM way statuses were. Like some of mine were like song lyrics. I remember when I was on AIM.
Oh, AIM.
It was usually making a cup of tea.
Nice.
Okay.
I like that. It's very British.
Brewing up.
Because AIM was actually...
for young'uns out there, we're talking about AOL Instant Messenger. For even younger, and for slightly less young ones, AOL is America Online.
Yes. Yes. It was hugely popular here in the UK. AIM was really popular here for some reason.
Right.
I just heard the door open now, so somebody was just
okay. All right. On that bombshell, thank you, Pat, so much for your time. Thanks for listening to this episode of Crosswires. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. So please drop us a note over to podcast@crosswires.net.
You can also drop us a comment on the post, or if you're a GoodPods user, why not start a discussion there too?
You can find us on Mastodon at crosswires@masthead.social. And if a bird site's still somehow miraculously here, you can follow us there as well at CrosswiresMG. And of course, you can find the show in all the good podcast apps, and all the really bad ones too.
If you'd like to check out more of our content, head on over to crosswires.net/YouTube for all our videos, and keep an eye on our Twitch channel at crosswires.net/live for our upcoming streams.
If you like what you heard, please do drop a review in your podcast directory of choice. It really does help spread the word about the show.
And of course, if you can spare even the smallest amount of financial support, we'd be incredibly grateful. You can support us at ko-fi.com/crosswires. That is ko-fi.com/crosswires.
Until next time, thanks for listening.